Okay, welcome back to the latest episode of the Sleep Edit, a podcast where we help tired parents and kids sleep better. I'm Dr. Craig Canapari,
And I'm Ariel Greenleaf.
and this is part two of our napping spectacular. Uh,
Naps really are spectacular.
you don't appreciate a nap as a child, but when you get one as a grown up, it's pretty great. Um,
Absolutely.
unless you have problems sleeping at night, then don't do that. This is a podcast about kids, so let's talk about kid naps
Mm.
instead. And kids, at least nominally, a lot of them are supposed to be napping. So last week we talked about napping in general, what the science says about napping, which is limited, trying to answer a lot of questions about napping. We have yet more questions to cover, but I thought it'd be very interesting because Ariel's brought some great cases talking about nap transitions, the ages they happen, and how parents can manage them. I thought it'd be good to go through them because this is something that many parents struggle with.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's start with going from 3 naps to 2 naps. If I recall correctly, at the last episode, you said that generally you see this around 8 or 9 months, though obviously it can vary.
I would say it can happen anywhere from 5 to 7 or 8 months. It's rare for me to see an 8 or 9-month-old on 3 naps. They need longer time awake to get that sleep drive to sleep well. And so, essentially what happens is that third nap starts to get edged out because it's starting way too late. It's starting at 5 o'clock or something like that. And then we're encroaching on bedtime. And that is one of the signs to look for when you're thinking about how do I know if I'm supposed to drop the third nap? One of those telltale signs is that your child needs more awake time before their first nap and their second nap, and you're getting to the third nap and it's 5 o'clock, it's 5:30, and your child is taking a nap until 6. And then you're trying to put them to bed at 7:30 or 8, and they're like, I'm not tired.
So this is related to the biology, right? Like a slower
Yes.
accumulation of sleep drive.
Yes.
Um, what parents are
Yeah.
going to notice specifically is that that third nap is moving later. And
Correct.
how do they know if that's interfering with bedtime?
That's a great question. I've been poking around on Reddit and some other places. I just like to see what's going on out there.
May God have mercy on your soul.
Sleep stuff and sleep training. I actually put a poll up today in my Instagram stories because have so many of these parents are putting their kids to bed between 9 and 10 p.m., which to me is, I'm talking about babies, infants, young toddlers. I just can't fathom having a baby or a young toddler
Hey,
awake that late. And the evidence does show that bedtimes before 9 p.m. are more beneficial to young children up until a certain age. I don't know which age that is, but I think it's for quite some time into young school age.
I feel like this is in really young kids. And we've all seen the families, their kids are taking 4 or 5 naps a day. And like, I'm talking about infants, like 2 or 3 month olds, and they're going to sleep at 10 o'clock at night. If it works for you, I guess it's okay for a short period of time, but it's probably not working that great because it's going to be shortchanging your baby's sleep at night and your sleep at night.
Yes.
Let's talk a little bit about the 2 to 3 nap transition.
Yeah.
We've talked about this. You said this is almost always done by 8 or 9 months of age, but
Yes.
typically you see it between 5 to 7 months. How is a parent going to know that it's maybe worth thinking about getting rid of the nap, and which nap should go first?
Well, it's interesting because I think it all comes back down to how much sleep does your child need in a 24-hour period. Because if your 5-month-old is lower on sleep needs, then they're going to need more time awake during the day. If your baby only needs 12 hours of sleep in a 24-hour period, that means they need 12 hours of awake time. Those quote unquote wake windows are going to be much longer than a baby that needs 16 hours of sleep in a 24-hour period, which
Mm,
leaves 8 hours of awake time. It's very rare for me to see a child that only needs 12 hours of sleep at 5 months.
sure.
What I will say is that there are children where, that they need more awake, they need more stimulation. They need to be awake, they need to be active for 2 or 3 hours before they can take their first nap. If they're sleeping till 7, that puts you at 10 a.m. And let's say we determine, we need to cap sleep at maybe 2.5 hours during the day. What's happening is 10 to 11 a.m., they're sleeping that first nap, and then they need until 2 p.m. to get to the second nap, and the second nap is 2 to 3. If they need another 2 or 2.5 hours of awake time, that's putting you at 5 or 5:30 p.m., which then encroaches on bedtime, in my opinion. I recommend ending naps for young infants by 5 p.m. As they get closer to age 1, I sometimes back that up to 4 p.m. because otherwise an 11-month-old who's lower in sleep needs and needs more awake time, that can sometimes mean that everything is pushed out, like bedtime. In general, I end naps by 5 p.m. for infants, and then older infants can sometimes be like 4 o'clock. It just depends on how much their total sleep is. So once we determine that total sleep that they need, that helps us sort of create that schedule for them, right? I have 2 5-month-olds right now, and they both get 13.5 hours of sleep in a 24-hour period. Sure, there's some nights or days where it's 14 hours. There are some days where it's 12.5 hours. It's going to vary, but when we average it out over 14 days, we see that 13.5 hours is what they're giving us. So how do we look at that? Well, we see, are they sleeping? Some children will sleep only 10 hours overnight, or they'll sleep only 11 hours overnight. So then you know how to break up the daytime sleep.
Let's make this very concrete. So you have 2 patients. Let's say
Yes.
they're 5 months old. They sleep
Yes.
14 hours in a 24-hour period. If you're trying to figure out the ideal placement of these naps and when they might be going from 3 naps to 2 naps.
So what happens is when those naps start to consolidate, the first 2 naps, when those first 2 naps start to consolidate, they're being woken up from the first nap or the second nap or both to get in that third nap.
Can we just define consolidate?
Sure, I'm sorry, consolidate, meaning that they're getting more than one sleep cycle for their nap. So pushing it beyond that 30 to 45-minute nap. And they're sleeping an hour and a half in conjunction with needing longer awake time. I think it all comes back to that third nap starting too late and then having difficulty putting the child to bed at, say, 7:30 or 8 p.m. They're not tired enough because that third nap is pushing beyond 5 p.m. or 5:30 p.m. and then bedtime is pushing later, and parents are like, I would really like them to go to sleep earlier because we have to be up for the day at 6 a.m. to get ready for daycare. We have to be looking at when is this child waking in the morning, and then how much are they getting overnight, if that makes sense.
So with a 14-hour sleep requirement, we talked previously how you felt like for a lot of kids, even young kids, 10 hours a night is pretty good, and then you apportion the rest of the sleep during the day.
Yeah.
So if this child was sleeping from 8 p.m. to 6 a.m., that would work well for a lot of families
Mm-hmm.
who have either a single parent or 2 parents who work outside the home because it gives them time to get ready in the morning.
Yep.
They're on a 3-nap schedule that might look like 1 hour and 15-minute, 1 hour and 20-minute naps 3 times a day, which seems almost too good to be true, right?
Yeah. In general, the third nap is dropped very early on in their lives, right? The third nap is usually just there to get you through to bedtime, and it's generally one sleep cycle, usually only 30 to 45 minutes. So I plan on the first 2 naps being longer. Now, those are the naps that are going to be there for a while until they drop to 1 nap. Focusing on those naps and making sure they're really getting more than a sleep cycle for those 2 naps is my main focus. A 30, 45-minute cat nap is fine. I have 2 5-month-olds right now. And that third nap is very difficult to get because they're sleeping well for their first 2 naps. It's a little too early for bedtime. So sometimes we have to give them a little extra support to get that third nap in. Right now, they're too young to go from waking up from that second nap at, say, 2 o'clock until 7 p.m. bedtime. So the third nap acts as a sort of bridge to get us through to bedtime.
Extra support means maybe rocking them to sleep, nursing them to sleep, stuff like that.
Stroller, anything like that. I would try to avoid nursing to sleep, especially if a child has a nurse to sleep association and that's what we're working on. I try to avoid that, but any sort of a little extra, do they fall asleep in the car? Do they fall asleep in the stroller? Do they sleep in the carrier? Put them in the carrier and walk around your house and do some chores or something just to give them a little more help, because that one is a little trickier to achieve. So with this scenario that you're giving me, What I would do is say if we're looking at, so the two that I have right now, it's 13 and a half hours is what they're getting. So since it's fresh in my mind, I'm going to tell you what that looks like. I'm capping both of the naps at an hour and 15 minutes, the first two naps. That puts us at 2.5 hours. The last nap is 30, 40 minutes, whatever. It's roughly around 3 hours of daytime sleep and 10 and a half hours of overnight sleep. I focus a lot less on, you're talking about that sounds too good to be true. Sometimes it is. So, say the baby takes a 50-minute nap, the first nap. We can allow for more sleep in that second nap because they haven't slept an hour and 15 minutes. We're looking at their sleep bank. They have, say, 3 hours of sleep during the day, 3 hours of nap time. If they're only sleeping 50 minutes for their first nap, we can allow a little more sleep to pull from that sleep bank for that second nap, let it go a little bit longer if they will, and then move on to that third nap.
So you mean 50?
Yes.
Okay. So just to summarize, in this example, with the 13 and a half hours of sleep, children are sleeping 10 and a half hours a night, 3 hours of sleep during the day. You look at the first nap, judging that, ideally, you're going to wake that kid up after an hour and 15 minutes. If they wake up earlier, you allow them to nap longer for the second nap. The third nap is the one where you're like, I have a fussy 6-month-old. It's dinner time. I can't have this kid go to bed now because they'll be up at 4 in the morning. So, it's not dinner time. It's 3 or 4 in the afternoon. I'm going to rock them till they fall asleep, put them down, try to get in 20 or 30 minutes as a bridge to bedtime.
Correct.
And eventually that becomes just impossible, or if it happens, bedtime gets a lot harder. So that's the time for that 3 to 2 nap transition.
Yes.
So what that is going to look like then is that the kids hopefully they're going to start having longer naps earlier in the day, and we might have to move bedtime earlier, right?
Yeah, we also have to pay attention to how long that child can stay awake for, because sometimes when you're moving to that second, 3 to 2 naps, you have to shift that schedule. You can't suddenly make a child sleep 12 hours overnight if they're only sleeping 10 and a half. Some babies will make up lost sleep overnight. Others are just going to sleep 10 and a half hours overnight no matter when you put them down. For those babies that can make up lost sleep during the day, you can get them down early for, 5:30 p.m. bedtime and they're up at 7. But for others, you put them down at 5:30 and their night is horrible. They think it's a nap and then they wake up at 7, or they're awake at 9 and they want to be awake for an hour, and it just screws things up. So you want to make sure that the baby is also able to handle longer awake times. The 3 to 2 nap transition, they still need the same amount of sleep. So now you're putting that 30-minute, 45-minute nap into dispersing that into those other naps appropriately. Some babies will say, I only want an hour nap in the morning, but I want to take a 2-hour nap in the afternoon. Capping it at 3 hours, planning for that 10 and a half hours is important, but also making sure that you're dispersing that 10 and a half hours of awake time between 3 wake windows. So those are going to have to get longer. They're going to have to stay awake longer and not freak out or start falling asleep before their next sleep time, if that makes sense.
So what I'm hearing is that 3 to 2 nap transition is tricky. There's a lot of moving pieces because often those kids, if they're finishing their second nap at like 2 in the afternoon, they can't go for 5 hours.
Correct.
The thing I've always noticed with nap transitions in general is there's always a kind of a rocky transition period. It's not where kids just raise their hand and be like, okay, I'm just going to stop napping now. It's going to be great. It's usually entails some period of time where you're going to be dealing with irritability if you're trying to get to bedtime. And that's okay.
Yeah. The longer I do this, the longer my tooth gets. I will say when they're ready, it's a lot easier than when they're not ready. So for instance, if daycare is trying to force a transition and they're not ready, that can be a lot more difficult than if naturally they're able to stay awake longer and their naps are getting longer. That is much easier than if it's being forced a little bit. And sometimes we get into situations where it's just a nap strike situation, but that's usually with a 2 to 1 transition. We're not there yet.
So parents are going to need to be attentive and
Yes.
see, well, my baby can be awake longer and I can't just put them down. I'm going to need to move things a little bit later and stretch that out to preserve the quality of that nap. This is really hard for people.
It's
And
very hard. It's
yeah,
very, very hard. I've been doing this for so long that I can see the signs, but I absolutely understand why people don't know what to do. Why is my baby not falling asleep when they used to? Why is my baby taking a 30-minute nap when they used to sleep 2 hours? It's confusing. And then you go online and you see these arbitrary wake windows, and that's even
yeah,
more confusing.
yeah, it's very confusing for people. So let's go to a nap, 2 to 1 nap transition, which, at least according to our show notes, is easier. So tell me about this. And we actually have
Did I say it's easier?
you said it's easier to spot.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I was gonna say the actual transition is not always easier. Um, yeah, I would say it's easier to spot.
So the 2 to 1 nap transition, easier to spot, can be difficult to deal with. What age do you usually see this?
Great question. When they're ready is usually 13 months to 16 months. There are outliers always, but that's usually where I'm seeing it. And I would say 16 or 17 months is on the late end. When babies and young toddlers are going through anything developmental, their sleep can be disrupted. There's something that goes on in the 11th month, not for all children, but enough that I can say there is a nap strike in the 11th month for many almost toddlers. And I think it probably coincides with cognitive developments. There's a lot going on. They're pre-verbal, but they're getting ready for language. If they're not already walking, they're getting ready to walk. They're running, climbing. All this stuff is going on. And they tend to have nap strikes. And it's usually only one nap. A lot of times it's the afternoon nap, which is awful because they're taking their morning nap and then they're a mess in the afternoon. They've woken up from their morning nap at 10:30 or 11, and then it's 7:30 p.m. bedtime, and they're just melting down. So then parents think, oh gosh, well, I should transition to one nap, but then it may go well for a little bit, but then it doesn't. I've actually seen people go back and bring back the second nap because they're just not ready to be awake for that long. I think it's important from the 2 to 1 transition. We were talking about this with the 3 to 2. It's important to think about the fact that your child only has 2 windows of wake time. If they're not able to stay awake for 4 or 5 hours at a time, they're not ready to transition to one nap.
That's a really good rule of thumb.
If your child is not able to stay awake for 4 to 5 hours between sleeps, they are not ready to transition to one nap.
Perfect. I think that's very insightful. I can tell you, for a lot of time it's walking. My brother was complaining to me that his baby, a little bit of a late walker, was 14 or 15 months, was making strides towards walking. He's like, naps are really chaotic. And I'm like, what should I do? I was like, send me some sleep diaries, but you can also just wait a week. And
Yeah.
she started walking, and it's just better.
I see a lot other milestones that affect naps are crawling. Crawling is a massive one. One of my current clients, when we first started, I didn't know if the child had something like if they were ill because they just woke up every 20 minutes, 15 minutes. They'd sleep for half an hour, then they'd wake up for 5 minutes. And I was just perplexed. And I sent her to the doctor. I had the ears checked. Everything was fine. And then lo and behold, the next morning after the third night of mayhem, she said, guess what he did this morning? He rolled over. And from that point forward, we got longer stretches of sleep. It's wild how much those milestones can affect certain kids.
Sure. Did you want to talk about this case of Drew we have, who's a 13-month-old?
So mom had reached out to me, and she was a client that I worked with Drew, I think originally at like 9 months or something, and we got him sleeping well and worked on Big Brother. After we got Drew sleeping, we got Big Brother sleeping. Mom came to me at around like barely 13 months and was like, I don't know what's going on. He's waking up super early. He's taking super short naps. Is it time for the transition? I told her to wait a little bit for that reason. I felt he was a little bit young. Let's see, let's try to adjust the schedule a little bit. Let's cap that first nap to see if it helps get a longer second nap. We tried that. It worked for like a day or two. And then he was back to a super short second nap or skipping the nap. He was awake from waking up at 10:30 or 11, and trying to get him to 7:30 bedtime was a nightmare. She came back to me about 2 weeks later and it had gotten worse. Ultimately, we made the determination, let's try this. He had skipped his nap enough and it was affecting overnights enough that I felt comfortable trying it.
And what was happening was he was skipping naps in the night.
It was unpredictable. And so I said, all right, let's give this a shot. So when I start the transition to one nap, I generally like to start. I don't want to push their first wake window too far, because a lot of times if we push 6 hours on the first day, they are not they can barely make it. They're falling asleep eating lunch. Then they take a short nap because they're not used to being awake for that long. So I try to make that a shorter wake time before the first nap. So I can start the first nap as early as 10:30 or 11 a.m. for the first few days. And what I do is I give that a shot. And as they adjust and start taking ideally an hour and a half or more, I slowly push them forward. Usually, if you're at daycare or preschool, naps start between 12 and 1. So my goal for all children that I work with is to get them starting a nap between 12 and 1. But it might take us
After lunch.
after lunch. It can take us a few weeks to get there. I might start at 10:30, then I go to 10:45, then I go to 11. It can be a 2-week process moving forward incrementally by 15 minutes. In some cases, I'll push them 15 minutes or even 10 minutes and suddenly the nap falls apart. So we pull them back again to that earlier time. The nap is longer. And then in a few more days, we push it forward again and things improve. During this time, though, it's important to remember that they're getting used to longer times awake. Normal bedtime may need to be brought earlier by 30 to 60 minutes, depending on your child. Some children do well with early bedtimes and they'll make up for sleep that they may have missed during the day overnight. Others, you have to put them down close enough to their bedtime. Otherwise, it just leads to a bad night. So I do recommend backing up bedtime, at least initially, as they adjust, because they can get tired in the afternoon not having that second nap.
So in a nutshell, you have a kid who's taking 2 naps. The naps get kind of crappy. The nighttime sleep gets pushed later. And then your process is going to one nap, offering it a little bit later than you would when there's someone taking 2 naps, but not that much
Yes,
later.
correct. And I think also paying attention to when they wake in the morning. So if you're working with a baby that wakes up at 5:30, you're probably going to start with that 10:30 nap. If I'm working with a baby or toddler that's waking at 7, I might push it to 11 or 11:30 because they're waking up later in the day. I'm getting to like 4 or 5 hours there before offering the nap, but that will vary based on each child's wake up time.
Yeah, just listening to this and thinking about the struggles that we had, the challenge is there's a lot of moving pieces, right? The children are becoming able to stay awake longer. There's the overlay of developmental milestones, which tends to mess everything up. They may be getting colds. There may be other things going on in the house. It seems like the key to success is tracking sleep. I see some people use the Huckleberry app. I don't know if
Mhm.
there's other apps that you like for this. People can do this on paper as well.
Yeah, I do like Huckleberry for their data. There are some other apps, they're kind of cumbersome and clunky. I actually prefer the spreadsheet that shows me tons of things. A lot of times, I always have a parent tell me, I don't get this information from the Huckleberry app, but I'll tell parents, tell me when you put the child down to sleep, but then tell me when they fell asleep. Like, how long is it taking them to fall asleep? Because if it's taking 30 minutes, we might have our
That's a
timing off. We might need to push them forward a bit to avoid either
good
crying or
stretch.
fussing. So that is kind of critical information.
How,
But
how,
yeah, the Huckleberry is a great place to start because it does give you averages. If you log for 7 days, you can look at the graphs and it will give you the average amount of time your baby is sleeping for naps, the average amount of time they're sleeping overnight, and their average 24-hour sleep. It's helpful. It's useful information in trying to decide what might work well for your baby's or toddler's schedule.
how do you find the data produced by smart monitors for work like
Oh,
this?
I don't like them.
I
The
don't
problem
I
the
don't want to
problem
make this a big editorial.
the reason why I don't care for that information is because a lot of times it will mark a baby or toddler as awake when they're simply moving in their sleep. So it will say, "Oh, your baby has been awake for 2 minutes," and they're really just turning around. But then they count that as a wake up. So it'll be like your baby woke up 13 times last night when really your baby is just shifting overnight. So that's why I don't find it very helpful.
Well,
It gives a lot of parents anxiety. It makes them think that their sleep quality isn't good when it's actually just normal sleep.
I suspect the issue is that, like we're talking about now, the audio video somnography is pretty well validated compared with gold standard technology like an EEG. But the fact is that short awakenings where your child is not crying are totally fine. In some ways, I prefer the parent data because it's actually the important data. If your child wakes for 15 minutes of the night and they don't cry, that's fine. So,
There you
so
go.
the parent data of when the parents perceive difficulty and when they perceive the child asleep is actually good enough because who are our, I don't like the word customers or clients or patients. It's the children, it's their parents too. If we can make everybody sleep better and the parents are happy with where they're at, that's what matters to me, and not how many random arousals a piece of technology said they had at night. Random arousals happen every night.
Those parental observations are so important to my work because they help me determine. Of course, I'm looking at it as a math problem. 13 and a half hours of sleep,
No,
10 and a half hours of awake. Let's try 2.5 hour, whatever. But, it's saying, yeah, I put them down after 2.5 hours, but then it took them 30 minutes of screaming, or I had to go in there several times. I'm like, okay, well, this should make sense mathematically, but your baby's not a robot. So
no.
let's try a little bit later next time and see if it helps eliminate that crying. Actually happened with one of these 5.5-month-olds. He was not falling asleep well at bedtime. He was doing fine for his naps, but bedtime was still a struggle. It was 30 minutes here, 45 minutes there, and then he would fall asleep. I just said, I think we need to put him to bed a little bit later. And she was reporting that
You know,
pure data.
I mean, when we use actigraphy, which is a research technology for measuring sleep, we still need sleep diaries, right? Like, because
Yep.
we need to know if a child falls asleep at midnight, if you put them to sleep at 11:59 versus 6 p.m., those mean very different things.
Correct.
And the
Yeah.
machine data does not tell us.
Right.
So let's talk about the dreaded nap transition, the end of napping. Let me just say with my kids, we had a month where our kids napped at the same time. They're 3 years apart. It was one of the best months of my life. It was amazing. I could chill, I could nap, I could play video games, whatever during that time. And then that was the end of it. And then I remember the youngest one gave up his nap when we decided it was time to be done with his pacifier because
Hmm.
permanent teeth start to come in. That's really when you got to get rid of it.
Yeah.
So we did the whole pacifier binky fairy thing where the
Hmm.
binky fairy comes, you get a gift, and
Hmm.
it goes to the other kids. The trade-off was he's like, well, this is great, but he just stopped ping afterwards.
He's like, cool, but
I think
I'm done.
the binky fairy also took his nap away too.
Well,
Bummer.
she got her signals crossed.
Yeah, I guess it's part of the, when you're dealing with these supernatural entities, there's a
I
cost to
know.
it.
There really is. I always
Well,
say don't talk about if your sleep is going well because you're going to have to sacrifice something to the sleep gods. For a first rule of Sleep Club, don't talk about Sleep Club.
yeah, exactly. Let's talk about this transition. I have more of a brute force approach. When I see kids coming in with terrible insomnia, they're staying up super late. I see this in teenagers and 4-year-olds, some of them 2.5-year-olds. The parents will say they don't fall asleep till 10 o'clock, and no matter what
Hmm.
we do, even when the sleep hygiene's on point, I'm like, what's happening with the napping? They're taking a 4-hour nap during the day. I would say that the typical age range for this transition is around 3. Sometimes it can be a little bit earlier. For other kids, it can be closer to kindergarten. The biggest sign that this transition is ready is either if there's big fighting at nap or all of a sudden your kid is staying up a lot later than you expect. The classic way is this: they're napping at daycare, they can't fall
Mm.
asleep till 10 o'clock, they don't nap on the weekends for mom and dad, and they fall asleep easily at 7 or 8. Those are the classic presentations of a child that's ready to give up a nap.
I see that last situation so much and it just breaks my heart. to see these children who fall asleep at school, and then it's like a disaster at night. And then, of course, they're tired for a nap the next day because they can't fall asleep because they've taken a nap. So it's like this crazy cycle. In that scenario, if you have a child that's at daycare or preschool and this is happening, sometimes it really causes some serious issues with behavior and sometimes health. If the nap is out of your control and they're in the care of someone else, and the other person is saying, well, I'm not going to keep them awake, get your pediatrician involved. They will write a note on behalf of your family saying, when this child naps, it's disrupting their important nighttime sleep. Sometimes people push back, but I would say the majority of times that has happened, they will work with the parent to create a nap bag or something where you bring it in and it's quiet activities that the child can play and do while others are napping. Your child isn't the only one in this situation.
No.
That's a complicated situation, but that is one workaround that I have used in more serious cases.
Yeah, I've had my notes disregarded by daycares.
Sure. Yeah.
I had one patient in New York City who was fired from his daycare because he didn't need to nap anymore. What can parents control and what can't they control generally if a child is
Is in daycare. I think this is probably the harder one, honestly. When it comes to naps and daycare, the two bigger issues that I see are pushing a child to one nap before they're ready and pushing a child to nap when they need to give up the nap. The first one is a little more controllable because if the child is on one nap and the nap is short, they can at least get home and put the child to bed earlier. Make sure they're fed, but don't prolong the bedtime routine and try to get them down sooner. That can often help. On the days that they're home, continue to offer the 2 naps. You can always try talking to the daycare, the teacher, or the director in that situation, but in many cases, they just don't have the room to keep your child in an infant room, which is generally a 2 nap situation. In the other scenario, it's really tricky. I think that one possible negotiation with the daycare could be, can we limit the nap to 30 minutes or an hour? If that doesn't happen, I think you just have to change your expectations, unfortunately. Not expect your child to fall asleep at the time they used to, because it's not that they might tantrum when you're trying to put them to bed. It's not their fault. They cannot biologically fall asleep because the sleep pressure has been relieved during the day and they just can't fall asleep until whatever time, 10 o'clock, for instance. They're kind of not great options either way, but that's sort of what we can control in those situations.
Yeah, it can be really challenging because it's hard to find good childcare.
Can we just go back to the 1 to 0 transition?
Sure.
I don't feel like I really gave clear advice on what to be looking for. Let's say the child is like almost 2.5 or just barely 2.5. I don't like to rush to drop a nap, but a lot of times I will look at the sleep diaries and the 24-hour sleep. I always start with capping a nap. If they say the nap is 2 hours, I'll say, let's start by backing it up. Let's see if capping it at an hour and a half or 1 hour makes any difference at bedtime. Usually there's a bedtime fight because the child is not tired enough to fall asleep at night. It can also cause overnight wakings, prolonged overnight wakings, and early rising because their sleep is shifting and any daytime sleep can disrupt their nighttime sleep. So when that's happening and the child is 2.5 or older, I'm looking at how long is the nap. Let's see if we can cap the nap, even sometimes 30 minutes. There are children who cannot sleep during the day or nighttime is a mess. Bedtime's a battle. It's taking hours, or the night is shortened because they wake up early in the morning. Those are really the things that I'm looking for. If they're 3.5 or younger, I won't rush to drop the nap. After that, it's almost always appropriate to drop the nap.
I think you're at a nice formulation here. And maybe we could close with this is, well, do you want to talk about nap strikes versus, which again, is not that precise a term, versus a nap transition? I feel like in my world, nap strikes aren't well defined, but I would say it's like, yeah, if your kid's clearly not in the range where they should be dropping a nap, but they're skipping a nap for some reason. It's
Yep.
usually not every day. Some days it's not other
Yep.
days. I think that sometimes this often has to do with it could have to do with changes in sleep schedule or something else going on with your kid.
Yeah. And I would say too, a nap is suddenly 30 minutes. I wouldn't rush to change the timing just yet, but if it's been going on for a little bit, you might try putting them down 30 minutes later and seeing if that makes a difference and lengthens whichever nap that is. But if those things don't change anything, then you're probably looking at your child is probably ready to drop it.
So you have a great list here,
Oh,
the signs that a kid is ready to transition for a nap.
sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's taking them a long time to fall asleep at night.
At least one nap is consistently shorter, under an hour, consistently defined as 1 to 2 weeks. Another one to look out for is sudden middle of the night wakings. That's a tricky one because sometimes that can be illness. So you want to make sure to exhaust all the other areas there before rushing to make it. Just because your child's waking overnight doesn't mean it's time to drop the nap. It's one of the things that can happen and be looking for if things are getting funky with naps.
Brett Kuhn, who's a sleep psychologist, calls this too much time in bed syndrome.
Yeah,
And for older kids, they may not even cry or be irritable during this time. They might just be awake
right.
in their room. Now, younger kids certainly may cry. Developmentally, they just may not want to be alone. But like, especially if you hear your baby quietly playing in their crib for an extended period of night, it's not worrisome, but it is a sign that maybe they're getting too much sleep during the day.
Yeah, something might be off scheduling wise. That being said, during milestones, sometimes babies will practice crawling in their crib or toddlers will practice standing in their crib. And so you want to make sure that it's not like just they're learning something new. And I know that's really hard. Like they can't talk to us and tell us, but that's why I say give it a week or two
Yeah.
and just see if things improve versus just a couple nights in a row, which is annoying, but it might pass.
Yeah. And I would say don't panic with 1 or 2 days of anything, but more consistent things than make one change at a time. Move
Yes.
one thing later or earlier.
Yeah.
Don't try to fix it all
Yeah.
because then if it gets worse or it gets better, you don't even know what worked.
Yeah, and I would also say that a lot of times just one change will make a difference. So,
Yeah.
pushing a nap later or capping a nap or something like that can make all the difference. Ensuring that it's really time to do something is one thing, and then, trying some things, but don't try too many things.
In a nutshell, parents are having trouble with a kid falling asleep for a nap or the naps are short. Moving that nap a little bit later is a good thing to do. If bedtime is difficult, capping that last nap of the day is probably what you want to do.
Or capping total daytime sleep.
And yeah, just to underline, tracking your baby's sleep over time. I know one other thing you had on your list was early morning awakenings. And you're like,
Mm-hmm.
you won't necessarily draw a line from too much napping during the day to early morning awakenings unless you're actually tracking it and be like, wow, my kid who sleeps 14 hours is sleeping 7 hours during the day. So
Yeah,
the
exactly.
math is that you're getting 7 hours a night and your kid's up at 3 or 4 in the morning. I think this is good. That's all I got.
I want to give very clear steps on 24-hour sleep.
Okay.
Because honestly, aside from learning to fall asleep independently, the schedule is such a big part of it that I want parents to understand that you don't even have to worry about the wake windows you find out there. Just log your own child's sleep.
That's how you generate the green leaf windows, which are cool.
I like that. The green
Yeah.
leaf windows. Oh, I should, trademark that.
Yeah, why not? I mean, everybody else is doing it.
Yeah. Right?
Love it. This is good.